Hello. Okay, we are recording. Um, I'm Nathaniel Slattery with Taurus Necklace Publishing, and you're an old friend of mine. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Anybody who knows me within Nate's circle probably would know me as the artist or one of the artists or something along those lines. Um, yeah, I don't know if my real name is going to do any good for anybody, so we can keep it as
Yeah, that's fine.
anonymous as that. But
Yeah, you're an artist, and I know. So
yes,
you were the artist, and then you became one of the artists.
yeah, I
And
think when I started making duplicate accounts for different, there's myriad streaming websites or whatever, that it just
oh,
became one of the artist's accounts essentially. That's kind of
oh,
how I pictured it.
you want to know how narcissistic I am?
Yeah.
I assumed it was because of me. And I'll tell you why. Because I was thinking about a couple of different old friends. Because me and two other guys, we all pray at the same hour every day for the same group of people. And so anyway, so Steven, do you remember Steven? Well,
Of
obviously we were
course.
talking about.
Yeah,
So do you remember Jeremy though?
yeah. Yes. If we're thinking about the same Jeremy, then yes.
Yes. So I might be wrong.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
his name there, it wasn't that before. Okay, so this is what happened. So 5 years. This is how nice. So 5 years ago, I had a debate with him back when I was doing apologetics,
Okay.
and um, and I think I won that debate. I assume I did. And what? But everyone was so upset with me. I remember I got into a big conflict with Devin. You remember Devin?
I
I
can't
want
remember
to
which
say his
one is
last
Devin.
name because it's so good, but I don't know if you would like
I'm
it.
not sure if I remember Devin.
But he was the gospel bearer, what they call
Okay.
him, and he was upset with me because I insulted his wife by accident. That was my
Hmm.
fault. But
Right.
everyone was upset with me because I said I think I'm right. I always said that, and then I debated Jeremy because I said, why would you argue with somebody if you didn't think you were right? That was always
Hmm.
the thing I said. And then you see how narcissistic I am. And then after that debate, which was closely related to that, Jeremy changed his name to Might Be Wrong. And then I
Hmm.
noticed you changed your name to one of the artists. And I said to myself, well, everyone's trying to be humble now. And I think it's my fault. That's what happened.
Well, it's funny because I think your name at one point was like Nathaniel the Great or something like that,
The
wasn't it? It was
Righteous.
the Righteous. That's what it
Yes.
was. Yes,
It was,
Nathaniel the
that's
Righteous.
right.
Yeah, so
And
I've always known about the narcissism. Yes.
yes, it's been a major problem.
Yeah.
Well, and I am narcissistic, but that's not what this is about. Um, although I've been talking about it a lot lately. Well, we can get
Well,
into it. Whatever. Yeah, we're
sure,
winging it. That's what we said.
sure.
So narcissism isn't a sin, right? I mean, it
Hmm.
could be, but is it a sin?
I don't.
Because you're not Catholic, so you have to figure it out on your own.
Right. Yeah. I don't. I
So
don't know if narcissism. Um, Frankly, I'm not even really that familiar with the clinical definition of what narcissism is. I know it's like deeply socially problematic, and that it tends to
sure,
manifest
yeah.
itself, with different traits that can be that can trend very easily towards vanity and sinfulness. But I don't know if narcissism is if it's intrinsically tied to pride.
Pride. That's
If
what
it
I would
is,
call it.
then yeah, I would say it's sort of inherently sinful as far as it's in so much as it is tied to pride.
Do you know? Do you know the Greek story of Narcissus?
That's
That's
I
what
know
everyone
of.
knows. That's what everyone
Yeah,
knows.
yeah. That's I'm vaguely familiar with Narcissus, and his like he like falls in love with his reflection, right? Is that the same?
Yeah, I don't know anything else about it either. It's just
Hmm.
everyone heard that story, and I think they basically, when someone says, "Well, define narcissism," they just tell that story. But it's
And then is it Psyche who falls in love with Narcissus?
Psyche falls in love.
No.
Somebody just told me it. I can't remember. I think Eros falls in love with
Yeah,
Psyche.
that's what it is. Eros and Psyche, I think. Yeah.
And I actually hope to interview a Greek about this soon,
Hmm.
because he is a philosophy. He
Actually,
wants to be a professor. I can't. He's like,
I think. Let's see. Oh, it's Cupid and Psyche. Yeah. So C.S. Lewis wrote "Till We Have Faces," which is actually like a retelling of the
Oh.
Cupid and Psyche myth. And I've heard that this is supposed to be among people who really know their C.S. Lewis and enjoy him and study him. They say it's his best book. So
Really, I haven't read it.
I haven't read it either. So
I've listened to on
up
audiobook. On audiobook, I've listened to like hundreds of hours of C.S. Lewis because I think for free, I got his like random essays, and it was 100 hours long, and so it ended up being a little bit. But I felt like after I listened to that I really understood the way he thought.
Lewis is he's very centered around medieval theology. Strangely enough, yeah. And you can really tell it with some of his fiction. I have his space trilogy, or the Ransom trilogy, I think people like calling it.
That's another. I have to read the other ones.
Yeah, so you can really tell. I think in those where he gets a little more medieval, but also I just finished.
He's good friends with Tolkien.
Yeah. He actually, the Ransom trilogy. Ransom, the character, is Tolkien. The character is a philologist,
right?
As Tolkien was, and he basically made the whole main character of those books. And then I think Tolkien wrote Lewis into The Lord of the Rings as Tom Bombadil. So I think they both kind of worked each other into their stories. But
who is Tom Bombadil?
Tom Bombadil he's not in the movies.
Put me in the setting.
Tom Bombadil, he is kind of like this. He's almost like a Father Time type character.
Oh, when they first leave the Shire and they're like,
yeah, he saves them from the Barrow Wight and from old Mr. Willow. He's married to Goldberry, I think. He's the only character in all the books who's not affected at all by the power of the ring.
Oh yeah, he's like.
Yeah.
I remember I read that part of it. I was weirded out, only because it was just so separate from. But Tolkien was like that. You don't like, or do? You said one thing one time that made me think you didn't like Tolkien. I'll give you my opinion.
I love Tolkien, but
do you? Okay.
Yeah.
As far as his writing, which one do you enjoy?
Yeah. That's hard to say. I think I enjoy Tolkien's fiction more than Lewis's fiction, but I have a deep respect for Lewis's nonfiction.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah. Have you ever read? Well, okay. So you have a lot of books. So you're a literature expert, and we are here to talk about literature.
Yeah, as much as you can be a little literature expert without paying a lot of money for someone to tell you that you are. Yeah, that's a fair diagnosis. Yeah.
Fantastic, which is good because
because
I like talking about books because I write them and I read them, and nobody else cares about them. You're like one of the only guys.
It is hard to find people who care. It's hard to find guys who care enough about it, I think you and I. I think women read more fiction than men, and I think the reasons for that are kind of self-evident.
They have the time.
Yeah, and it's also like a relational sort of language, like fundamentally linguistic sort of interchange, I think, is kind of a feminine thing, but
No,
I
I
think
believe
men also spend just more time reading nonfiction. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily that men read less than women. I think it's just that women tend to be the ones reading fiction.
I
I also
think.
think that women read, like, for the most part, really bad fiction, though.
Well,
So,
I was just gonna say that. I think that women are not. Women are a different sort of
yeah,
intelligent, uh,
yeah,
where it's very emotional
yeah,
and relative, right? So I think almost everyone understands that. Uh,
hmm
whereas men are more factual, and so a man could read what he wants to read in an hour and be
hmm
content and walk
hmm
away from it. But a woman is more willing to read for like a month for no without really being able to tell you why, except that she
yeah,
feels like it. She
yeah,
doesn't need a reason.
and and I think that
So that's
there,
probably why
there
they read fiction because
yeah,
it's hard
yeah.
to
There's
understand why you
some
should read fiction. What's the point?
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
what do you get from
There is some value in that. I think willingness that women have to spend time in fiction. It's funny though because as you and I've talked about fiction and I've kind of like started preparing to talk to you today.
it?
It
Yeah, I
was
wrote something about it.
going, yeah. I mean, you sent me those questions kind of, and but it's something that's been you know look behind me that the pile of time on my shelves. I mean, 'cause that's what it amounts to is time and money.
Right.
It does kind of end up weighing on you after a while, especially when you extrapolate things out into the future and you think, well, if I collect at this pace for the next 30 years, like I'm going to be overrun with books. And at some point, my children are going to look at me and be like, Dad, what are you doing? Why are you spending all this time and money and energy on these things?
Well,
And it's you kind of, I'm beholden to give an account, as we all are, for how
right.
we spend those things. So
That's
yeah,
true.
it does it having a good reason for it is is something that I think is worth spending time on, and I'm very hesitant to be even fair with myself. I think sometimes about giving myself any kind of um, leeway or a license to justify, a hobby, even if it's just sometimes it's literally that. People, it's really easy to say, well, people have hobbies. Some people spend a ton of money on sporting events or going to
Right.
concerts or whatever it might be.
Oh
And
yeah.
it would be very easy to say, as far as guilty pleasures go, literature is among one of the more benign hobbies you could have, if not
Financially.
beneficial. Yeah,
Financially,
financially.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and intellectually beneficial. But there is also
Yeah.
a tie with any intellectual pursuit to something that seems fundamentally open to a Luciferian intellect. So
Oh yes. Yeah.
yeah, there are a lot of dangers to intellectual
Well,
pursuit.
yeah. It's also very subtle. Like
Hmm
how's like well, let me ask you this. I was going to tell my story about burning books, but which I think has a lot to do with the fact that like Americans are very attached to books, and I see that in myself. And they kind of teach it in public school where we like worship the written word for no particular, just
Mm.
because it's like the storage of knowledge. But it's
Yeah,
like, well, a lot of it's pornography, so
yeah,
you don't
yeah,
need that much knowledge about the marital act and its
yeah,
purposes.
yeah.
You
It's
need
very true.
very little, and it comes naturally.
Yeah,
From my
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, uh, uh, so my question is, what was I going to say? Okay, so why do you read that? Why do you? Well, because you think about it. Unlike a woman, you think, well,
You're,
I have to answer to God for all this time and money.
yeah, right. Yeah,
There's other things I could be doing, and I don't have to ever please myself in any way. I could just die in a ditch. medically
Right.
died, and he died on the
Right.
cross. So what?
I,
So why do you do
I,
it? I haven't answered
I,
it, but I want
yeah, I mean, if what you mean, if what you're asking when you ask why do I do it, if that is a moral or ethical question of how I justify it to myself, then that's something different. But as far as like,
well, I don't think there's anything wrong with recreation. So it's totally
sure,
fine to
sure,
say I enjoy it.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine.
But as far as
Recreation is actually pretty.
why we could get down to why does anybody do anything, and
Yeah.
there are
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
three fundamental, and I'm stealing this from a book too. Ironically, is there are social reasons, there are environmental reasons, there are personal reasons, there are intellectual reasons why this happens. But I think ultimately, for me, it's probably just a matter of habit at this point, and it's something that I've developed a taste for, and that it scratches a certain kind of itch that I've developed to satisfy either a intellectual sort of satisfaction, or I mean, I'm very much kind of an artist by nature, so I've always kind of been wrapped up in the humanities, and I'm probably a
Right.
little more susceptible to fiction than nonfiction. I think there's a reason why it kind of
It's an art. Yeah.
tended in that direction. Yeah, because of its art form, and I grew up um, in a very like book friendly sort of environment. Like it was one of those
Oh,
things where like the only reason that we could use for justification for being up past bedtime was if we were reading. And so my parents were like, "Oh, you can stay up as late as you want as long as you are reading a book." And so I was like,
nice.
"Oh, well, I'm never going to sleep again. I'll just read books." And so that was that kind of got me hooked on it.
Right.
And then I think the Lord of the Rings actually did have a big the movies. I didn't really read a whole lot. I think as a kid, because I didn't really know books could be as satisfying as they were. I remember a couple times being very surprised by books that I was like, "Wow, these books can be way more than I thought they could be. They could be really really funny, which I didn't know as a kid.
Right.
They could be really clever."
Right.
Then I think I read, or my mom read was it the greatest Christmas pageant ever? The one about the Herdmans or whatever. I think they just made it into a movie actually. And then there were some, scholastic book fairs and stuff like that. I remember reading the Artemis Fowl books and
Yeah.
really enjoying those as a kid.
I
Um,
remember everyone buying them, and I couldn't
yeah, yeah. I
those
think
book
I got
fairs are
most of them from the
pricey.
library. Yeah,
Right.
they weren't really cheap. Yeah, of course now, um, I don't know. I guess they're probably more expensive than they ever have been. But uh, you can get everything for basically for free in an ebook form if you have a library card, which is nice.
Right. Yeah. That's
But
what I did. In fact, I got to get a library. I just moved, but I used to get a
mm,
bunch of books from the library. I couldn't find any. My biggest problem with that was I couldn't find classics, uh,
mm,
or I couldn't find like theological stuff, like the
yeah,
church fathers or anything like that. And there are a lot of classics I couldn't find either. Like the popular.
church libraries are really valuable for that.
Yes,
The
that's what
churches I've
happened.
always been to had libraries. Yeah.
I went into my parish library. I pulled a few books down. I said, "What is this garbage? This is disgusting." And I
Oh
showed it.
no.
That's what happened. I showed it to my priest, and he's like, "Yeah, man, it's a problem." And it's like it's a huge mess in there. He said, "Yep. Well, nobody really goes in there, but like a few old ladies. So
Mm,
I'm kind of dealing with some other things, but it's a problem."
yeah.
So I said,
Yeah.
"Well,
Curating the church library is probably not first on the list of things that need to be done.
he had to get rid of like Freemasons meeting in his church and stuff like
Mm,
that. Well, I think the priests there were two traditionalist priests in row, and in that parish, but it was a very hippie parish apparently
mm.
in the beginning. But he's the priest who converted me. He's converted. But what I told him was, I said, well, what if you give me a blank check and I'll just go in there and do whatever I want to do. And then if anybody asks you, like these old ladies that get involved in politics, like St. Paul says, they become busybodies, you know.
Sure.
I said, if anyone asks you, just say, yeah, I don't read very much, but I told Nate, he said he wanted to take care of some things. What's he doing? Yeah. And then just let him hate me. It'll be fine.
Gave him the opportunity to use you as a scapegoat. Yeah.
That's right. I said, man, I'm a pig farmer in a different state that just comes here on Sunday with my children.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Just
So is
tell
this
me
the beginning of the book burning story? Is that you burning
Oh,
books
yeah.
out of your
Well, this
parish
happened-
library?
This happened after my own personal book burning. I was
Oh,
pretty,
okay.
I was pretty advanced. So, yeah, I'll tell that story. Well, it was actually a very deeply spiritual moment. I moved into my house, the first house I bought, newly married, expecting a child. We were setting up books in the bookshelves, and I filled up one bookshelf. I filled up a second bookshelf. I filled a third bookshelf. My wife started to be like, "Oh," she's like, "Yeah, I wasn't Catholic at the time, and I had things on there that were like really demonic and stuff, you know, that I read,
Mhm.
and I had a lot of biographies of um, the uh, the presidents of the United States, really nice ones, like really famous biographies that a lawyer had gifted me, and
Hmm.
bad because they were okay. But she basically complained that we wouldn't have any books, and I was looking at my books, and I was like, I don't even want my children to ever like see these. I don't want them to
Mhm.
see and ask about them. So
Mhm.
then, and I noticed this attachment where I wasn't wanting to get rid of them, and so then I just decided to burn them all, and that's what I did. So I had a in my front yard right when I moved into Tennessee. So I had all these neighbors driving by, and there were just these books of like Thomas Jefferson, The Last Lion, Churchill, and it's just, hey, howdy, neighbor. You know, I had some friends over
Yeah.
that were helping me burn these books. That's how I entered Tennessee. And I
Oh,
was
that's
always,
great.
you know what I loved about Tennessee is the neighbors were like, hey, how's it going? They just kept. There was no sense that there was anything wrong with it. And then,
Right.
and the same thing happened one time when I had to butcher a sheep, and I had my truck for the first time. I strung it up in my carport, and I had my truck there with the lights on. And so I had to get in the truck every few minutes and turn the lights back on so I could see what I was doing. And the same
Mhm.
thing, neighbors were like, "Hey, howdy, neighbor." You know, it was like
Yeah.
good stuff, and
Yeah.
so that was the first book burning. By the time I got to the parish, well, when I left that house, I just left it. I sold it. There were still boxes of books degrading in the rain next to my house from that
Mm.
parish library. Because I said the next time I dig a hole or start a fire, I'll take care of these books. And I just never did. They just sat there. But I mean, I destroyed them too, so it worked out.
So, see, this is like I think one of the things that I appreciate about your appreciation for books or level-headedness, I guess, about literature in general, is that you aren't just a mindless like just read anything, just whatever people can get their hands on, just read it. Just people just need to read more
Right.
books, you
That's
know,
what they told us
because
in
that
public school.
is this is so much of the sentiment that I run into is all just overinflated sentimentality. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's just sentimentality for the act of reading in itself.
Right.
And people try to justify it by saying, "Oh, well, when you're reading, your brain is firing in certain ways. It doesn't matter what you're reading, as long as you're reading something."
Oh, well, you know what we
And I'm
should
like,
do? We should take the biggest church in America and turn it into a temple of reason, or whatever it is that we use.
right,
You know? Yeah, that's what it is. This is worship
yeah,
of the human brain. It's material.
yeah, yeah. And I'm definitely more, I think, liberal. I mean, without a doubt, more liberal than you with the sort of material that I allow onto my shelves.
Right.
But
Because I
but
tried to read The Sparrow. And
yeah, yeah.
that book messed me up a little bit. I never finished it, but what I did do is I read the about the author page, and then I figured out who was her agent, and then I contacted her agent and said,
Yeah.
would you please be my agent? Because my thought was I can just pay her, and then be a better person than the last person she
Well, I think
represented. That was my idea.
she converted to Judaism, I think.
She became a
Yeah,
Jew. She
yeah.
was a Catholic.
Yeah, that book was rough. So that book was actually recommended to me by
By
my
your
pastor,
pastor. Yeah.
and then I
And
sat
I'm
down with
not
him.
judging. I'm sure it
No,
was.
no, I judged. So you feel free to. I sat down with him at a restaurant for lunch one time to kind of go over it with him, and I said, um, I don't think you should be recommending this book to people. And he said, "Oh, I don't." He said, I just thought that you might enjoy going through it and seeing all of the problems and have an interesting conversation about it afterwards. So it's not like this was something that he was like, oh, this is a fantastic work of art and literature or something like that. He was like, there are foundational problems with this work
Well, that's
in as much as it, pretends to be this kind of story of like evangelical Jesuit science fiction or something like that.
right.
But I mean, that book is basically the farthest thing from what it pretends to be,
Yeah.
or
Well, she's
what you believe it to be, and and by the synopsis, and by the time you're done with it, it's essentially just a story of apostasy.
that's what it's about. Okay.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, they
So
try
it's
to.
like religious things. I wasn't sure if there were going to be like disturbing sex
It is. Yeah. No, there is that.
torture.
I
And I've
believe
published
he is.
torture. I've written
He's
torture.
he's essentially. I think he kills a child. He becomes a like some kind of like alien sex slave, and then like accidentally kills a child who is like his only friend in prison because he's like thinks that this is his way out, and then he kills the child before he realizes that it is this child, and so he's like goes back to Earth, finally gets rescued, and he's like grappling with like how could God allow these things to happen to him, and he it's kind of this thing that books always like to do is leave you in this gray area where it's like, oh, we're not
Right.
going to really tell you one way or the other how he believes or how you should believe. We're just going to leave it there where maybe he lost his faith or maybe he didn't. But he's, yeah, living in this Jesuit compound and has had all these terrible, traumatic things happen to him. And you're like, why did I what did we get out of this exactly? It felt a little less than useful by the time I got through with it, and I was surprised, but in some ways also not surprised, I guess, to hear how
Right.
lauded it has been. So
Right. There's a few books like that I've had.
hmm.
Because I'm a writer, so it's like you're you're a reader, which is probably way better in a lot of ways.
Certainly less effort.
But I don't know. But I really have no idea. I've tried to not write, and it just doesn't work
Hmm.
out. But I have actually recently.
That's how I feel about writing. I've tried to write and it doesn't work out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I still dabble every once in a while, but
I'm
reading
not
is my skill, not
I'm
writing.
not the person that thinks you should write either.
Yeah.
I mean, like the generic you. I have no idea if you should write. I actually spend a lot of time teaching people to write or encouraging people to write, anyways, are that have already decided that they want to write, basically. But I've never once told anybody you should write. It's
Hmm.
always somebody that, and I don't know if I've ever told anybody they shouldn't write. I always just take them. I have learned. I've written a lot of books now. We published me and you
Hmm.
published Marcus Woodward together,
Yeah.
and that was like the fourth book I had finished, I think.
Hmm.
Um, so I have learned that I am always writing a book. I'm always writing many books actually. and it ends up being this weird like spiral into eternity if I spend too much time thinking about what I am writing.
Mm.
And I'm talking about like I'm cutting the lawn, and my mind is working on things, and I'm like, what book am I writing again?
Yeah.
And I can't ask. That's a very dangerous question for me to ask. You know? The only time I can ask that question is when I'm looking for a file on my computer. That's the only time it's a legitimate question to ask.
So when you're writing things, I mean,
If I pick up a notebook, I try not to think about what book I'm
okay.
writing. Try
So
not
how
to.
do you? I mean, I imagine from what I've read of yours, though, you do find a line eventually to cut different themes into
Yeah.
this narrative or that narrative, and
Well, what do you mean
does
by
that come out of
theme?
just um, well, like Marcus Woodward certainly had its own sort of tone and
That's right.
themes of like a man, finding his way and being saved
Right.
um, and what I've read of other stories of yours had a very different tone and different themes. Some of it overlaps, but
Right.
as far as like when you're mowing the lawn and thinking about what to write, uh, where 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 do you decide what things you want to write go into which stories that you're currently developing?
Well, sometimes I shoehorn them in. I just feel like writing something, and
Mm.
then about like halfway through writing it, if I'm running it by hand, especially, um, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I've got to name this person Marcus, so I can put this in the book. So, but the thematic things uh, are definitely there. I think it mostly comes out of whatever I'm experiencing in life,
Mm.
uh, and because I will tell you this, because you read that essay, right?
Mhm.
That I have determined that when I am writing, I am contemplating God. That's what I am doing, and I write basically in order to contemplate God through His creation, and
Yeah,
especially His creation of the human soul, which of all the things to think about is one of the most worthwhile, and
yeah.
it's one of the closest to God as far as like showing who He is,
Mm.
amongst His
I,
creation.
and I think it's and maybe this is part of the reason why I enjoy reading. um, I think the the propensity towards reading ultimately for me comes down to being raised with a biblical literacy in my house
Yeah,
growing
that's
up.
kind of the American tradition.
Yeah,
Well, I didn't have
yeah,
that though.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and this is like most of Western readership in general comes out of biblical literacy. I mean, it's the most
Well, well, it's a
popular,
very. I said it's
most
a
sold.
very. Yeah. Sorry, you talk.
No, it's all right. But I think as, and I don't write nearly as much as you do, or with as much intention. But when I do write, I think it has that same. It's me thinking about God as I deal with the conflict of this idea or that idea against another, and you can
Right.
position them as characters and very easily form a dialectic and kind of work these thoughts out. And you
Right.
see that,
Right
time
on.
and time again in books that you read as well. So it lends itself, I think the act of or the art of literature lends itself to a a um, a theological foundation
Yeah.
more so than the visual arts do, or even music or something else. At least for me, it's easier to see the explicit and direct relationship between the truth of the written word and theology than it is to try to fetter out some idea about what Michelangelo meant to portray about his ideas about God through this painting or another painting or what else,
Well, there's a lot of interesting things there. I'm overwhelmed by it.
Take your time.
There's a lot of so. One thing I want to say is that I don't know. You're not you're not Catholic, but so people say that that the Western world, was illiterate in the medieval times.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's true or not, but if um, the the sacred images in a church, especially like a cathedral, this is still true. Like there's laws that regulate it, and the
Mhm.
reason is because that is how the common people learn
Yeah.
theology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that predates the Renaissance, obviously, and so art, Western art, is actually its foundation is in telling a story, and
Mhm.
specifically a theological story. Because the
Yeah.
obviously you just said biblical literacy. Well, the
Yeah.
Bible is not. It's not an abstract theological work in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
It's a very precise narrative most of the time, and then there's some law and some poetry and tons of history. Most of it's history, and then there's a little bit of theological. And I'm just talking about quantity. I understand you read things at different pace. And there's philosophy in there, but there, as far as like quantity goes, if you don't make a distinction between the New Testament and the Old Testament, and you just approach it as a book, the theological uh, the actual like abstract theological work is
Mhm.
very small. It's basically
Yeah.
epistles. That's all
Yeah.
it is. And
Yeah.
so, but okay, so that's one thing. But you said biblical literacy, which is really interesting to me. So the other thing that's different about me and you, which I want to get to the bottom of, is you're a German, right?
Yeah.
Right, and I'm an Irishman. And what I was saying earlier about the American tradition that writing and reading has everything to do with the Bible, I don't think is a Western thing. I actually don't think that.
Mhm.
I think it's just a few Western nations, and one of them's German. Uh, Another one is England. So I said it's an American thing. I think it's an English thing, and
Mhm.
I think you could definitely tie that to the Reformation, um,
Yeah.
because I mean everyone says that. I was just talking to a Mennonite. He said Zwingler. He said the three big reformers: Calvin, Luther, and Zwingler. Zwingler being the founder of the Mennonites, and the Baptists, and a lot of the things came from it. But he's a German, and
Mhm.
like he was a Swiss man actually, and um, he this Mennonite said the phrase, he started reading his Bible, and then you know, and that's a very interesting thing because it sets a whole culture. But
Mhm.
the Irish are not like that, I don't think, because just using me as an example, I didn't have biblical literacy when I read the Bible for the first time. It was a year before I wrote Marcus Woodward, and
Mhm.
uh, my dad, when I told him I had read the Bible, I was a little bit embarrassed to tell him. He said, "Okay, well, don't stop there. Now read the Quran and
Sure.
I think he listed like the Hindu one and the whatever the Bhagavad or whatever that part.
Bhagavad Gita and the Tao Te Ching and yeah.
Yeah, he's really reads a lot about Taoism. In fact, I
Okay.
read Taoism as it relates to poker before I read the Bible.
Really
Yeah, my dad loves poker. He's a wonderful. He's a very wise
interesting.
man. I don't mean to make him sound bad, but it just kind of
I
gives you.
think anything you said was disparaging. Yeah.
Yeah, so it just kind of shows a lot about what my house was like,
Hmm.
and so what you are saying about the fact that it lends itself to the contemplation of God
Hmm.
by its nature, or to like theological abstraction, I think is true. I think that's true.
Yeah. Well, I think it's true about art as well. I
And
think
okay, it
that
has to do with the Bible.
ultimately any symbol, it kind of comes down to the same idea as all truth is God's truth. Any foundational symbol that we can recognize at its core is a godly representation. I mean,
Yeah, if
you
it's
could kind of
accurate.
talk about, yeah. I mean, you could. I don't want to get all weird with like sacred geometry stuff, but
Go ahead.
symbol. I don't even know enough of it to get into it. But
I learned a little bit about it in construction because I was building a
hmm,
oratory, and I was talking to a man who was reading a book about architecture. He was talking about how the church fathers said that the square is a holy shape, but
hmm,
the rectangle is an unholy shape, which is interesting because modern
interesting.
houses are all rectangles.
True. Conglomeration of rectangles. Yeah,
That's what we do in America.
yeah. But they're all topped with triangles, so they're covered by a holy shape.
Yes, yeah, the triangle points to heaven.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
put a very unique roof on that oratory.
Hmm.
But anyways, go ahead. Well, I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying.
No, yeah, it was essentially we kind of covered the basics of it, but the idea that you know finding symbols in literature that point to um, biblical truth is the same way as finding um, anything, any symbol in art, even if it is ironically a satanic symbol, still points to a certain necessity for, or it begs a certain biblical literacy, even if it is a cursed or satanic symbol, still
Right.
leads to the biblical narrative. So
Well,
it's kind of interesting.
well, um, idolatry is all about symbols, and
Hmm.
um, there are people who think that that is an idol. I think they
Hmm.
can't point properly. That's
Hmm.
no, that one, no, that one. There are people who think that that's an idol,
Hmm.
and carving it up belief. I don't think that they can really give the theory behind it, but
Hmm.
um, that obviously is all about symbolism. What are
Hmm.
you symbolizing? And I can talk
Right.
about that. But what I was going to say and I wanted to say about is about abstraction. So,
Hmm.
because a symbol is an abstraction, right?
Yeah.
And so,
It's an analog. Yeah.
and I think that's why fiction tends towards God, um,
Hmm.
because most fiction is very simple. I mean, almost all of it, and
Yeah.
even the good stuff, even like the good stuff like Dostoevsky or whatnot.
Yeah.
There's still
Oh,
things that
Crime and Punishment is an unbelievably simple book. Yeah.
really, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't read it. Um, I,
It's. I mean, it is exactly the title is the spoiler. There is a crime, and there are various punishments for that crime.
oh,
It is very very straightforward book, and it
I,
follows a very limited number of characters.
good.
Yeah.
Well, that's better than. Well, anyways, um, but what I was going to say is most of it's sinful, right? But it's
Hmm.
weird to me, and that's actually what this essay that you read. It's the first thing
Hmm.
I published on Substack, and it lost me some friends. They said it was very arrogant. Um,
Hmm.
but what's weird to me is, what was I going to say? Is the fact that as an art form, the novel, which is very recent, God preserves. He's not destroyed. Even though
Hmm.
I've read so much garbage, and so have you, that's like,
Yeah.
and this sucks hours from your life. It tricks you, and then it disturbs you deeply, more deeply than I think images are even capable of doing. The world,
Yeah.
because you're so into it, and it draws upon the faculties of your soul in a way, whereas in a way that's kind of undoable. Like it can't be done by a movie. You know what I'm talking about? It's just more invasive.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh.
What?
Okay. You lagged out for a second.
Oh. Well,
You were
did you hear
talking
what?
about you said something about disturbing books, and that was
Right.
about the last thing I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, I said the same thing 3 times, thinking this must be really
Okay.
profound because he's not responding. Even though it's
Yeah.
well, you agree with that, right? It's just more it's more intimate or whatever. It's like,
Wait, I missed the tail end of what you said. Can you repeat it a fourth time?
yeah. Well, I think a book disturbs you more. So if you give a book your trust and really enjoy
Sure.
it, suddenly like the author does something you should not have done.
Yeah, there's certainly a matter of investment there. Yeah.
I think it hurts you more than a movie can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a movie. Yeah, a movie you spend an hour and a half with, um, and it's a very passive experience. You don't spend any time, um, and this is sort of the risk and reward, I guess, of reading, is that with reading, you are the one burning these images into your imagination by
Right.
the act of by your own intention. You
Right.
know, you have to
Right.
process the words and turn them into an image in your mind. Whereas when you're passively consuming a visual medium, it's just given to you, and you can look at it for as long as you want. And with a movie, it's even more passing, because you're not sitting and looking at a painting for an extended period of time. It's 60 frames a second, and you're on from one scene to the next scene to the next scene, and before you know it, it's over. So the movies are much easier, and probably shows or YouTube videos or whatever. The shorter it gets, is probably even easier to dismiss as that wasn't very good. I can move on. But if you spend 10 hours with a book that is intended to be disturbing, it has a much greater capacity to stick with you. And there are certainly some authors who intend nothing less than that. I think J.G. Ballard, who he wrote a number of books. I think he wrote the Sun Also Rises or something like that. They turned it into a movie with Christian Bale when he was a kid. But he wrote a book called Crash, which became a Cronenberg, a body horror movie later on. And Crash is essentially about people who are aroused by the violence of automobile accidents. And he said literally his desire in writing that book was to rub the face of humanity in its own vomit. And it's certainly it seems that he achieved what he set out to achieve, and it's kind of shocking to me more than the material even in the book might be, is that there is a readership who longs for that experience in some way. And that there are people. I've never been, admittedly, I've never been one for horror movies or
me
for
neither.
gore and violence. It's never really appealed to me. The shock and awe value. So I think maybe we are not exactly a fair or a very wide sample of the general public's taste in books or movies or whatever. You and I are spending plenty of time talking about biblical symbols and all truth being God's truth, but there are some people who are just like, they're out there for horror and shock and the exact opposite. There are plenty of very, very well received books that are just all about the Kabbalah and anything other than Christian symbolism. So
Well, I'm trying to think of some like really disgusting books I've read, but I don't know if any of them were centrally, like in the center of it, that way. It was always kind of like a tangential part of it. I think the closest thing I ever read was Ulysses by James Joyce. That was kind of
Joyce is a weird guy.
Oh, and that's the only thing I ever read by him. And and it was kind of an act of pride because my philosophy teacher said that she read James Joyce, she read Ulysses, and she kind of made it sound like it's what the really smart people read. So
yeah,
that's what I asked. I did get
Yeah,
from it, but it was hard to get it. It was very
yeah,
hard to get anything.
yeah. I have a copy of Finnegan's Wake up there on my shelf, and I sometimes enjoy just pulling it down for people when they want to sound when they want to experience what absolute gibberish on a page sounds like. I mean, it's very interesting. I think oh, what's her name? I can't remember her name. Um, an author. She's kind of in the Catholic authorship space. She talks about a little bit of. There's a point where Joyce is like translating the words of thunder, and so there's just this rolling gamut of vowels and consonants that he's trying to say something fundamentally about language and its ability to, you know, kind of be transposed into different forms. But
Ha!
Joyce was, I mean, he was total narcissist as well. So
Right.
his whole thing was like, I just want scholars to argue about what I wrote for the rest of time. I don't want anybody to know. And I think there's a book club that I just heard about recently that was like, that has spent the last, I want to say like 20 to 30 years reading Finnegan's Wake, and that's the only book that they will ever read. And they're, as soon as they finish it, they start it again, and they go like 2 pages a week or something like that.
Huh.
So it's taken them forever. They just finished it, but it's not a book I don't think I'll ever finish. But
Yeah. So there's something
or
about it that has like an because you read because I remember like Stephen King talking
mm,
about James Joyce as an example
mm,
of a great writer, and maybe that's the difference between it's kind of that reading for the sake of reading, like any book is for
mm,
reading, but then there's like your conscience where it starts to say, well, what in the world is the point of this?
yeah.
And I asked myself when I finished Ulysses, I asked myself, what in the world is the point of that? And what I came up with was um, a man could do one good act for somebody, even though he's totally preoccupied with a lot of very strange problems in his own mind.
Mm.
That's what I, that's the conclusion I reached. But
There's something like
since I got
very
that out of that, I said to myself, well, you didn't have to write a book that long.
well, the funniest thing, yeah, I totally agree. It's really weird though because
Balaam's ass
there's
is a great example of that in a very
what
simple
is
manner. Balaam's ass in the Bible
oh okay
was a donkey.
yeah I there is a certain thing as we were talking about James Joyce and other um I don't know winding fiction I guess
In a
that's
certain in a certain sense,
deeply highly symbolic but um,
okay.
there are there are I know there are people. I want to say it was the guy who came up with the double helix model for DNA. The scientist who discovered this. He
Right.
said that he thought of this idea and saw it in Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Like, and Finnegan's Wake is so if Ulysses is the day, then Finnegan's Wake is the night. It's like the dream counterpart to Ulysses,
Oh, really?
and yeah, and it's very ethereal and cerebral and kind of meandering, but it lends itself, I think, and I think I've experienced some books like this in a very limited sort of um, in a limited amount, I should say, but um, like I remember reading some like post-structuralist Marxist nonfiction that was so just high on itself and self-involved that it almost invites the reader to fill in its pages with meaning that they construct themselves as they're reading it. And that's kind of what I get out of the guy who said, "Oh, the double helix is in Finnegan's Wake." I'm like, it's almost definitely not. Like, but because he was so focused on that in his work, and because the narrative of Finnegan's Wake is so open to creative interpretation, and it's anyone's guess what it could possibly mean, that I think readers are almost required at some point to put their own meaning into what they don't understand, because we have that desire, like what you're talking about, to get something out of it.
Right.
We want to believe that we're not wasting our time reading these things. So if we're not getting something out of it, then we'll be like, well, I can create my own meaning in these things, and I'll just put my thing in there, and I'll say, well, I got at least, my mind was able to get something out of the slop that was this thing that I read, and then we
Right.
make it more profound than it is. And I think that sometimes that happens, and it was one of the things that I think I always, and most kids push back on in school, is this cop out that the humanities teachers often give students to invent their own interpretations, and this
Right.
idea of well, oh, as soon as a piece of artwork is put out into the world, well, it no longer belongs to its creator. Now it is a collaborative belonging between those who experience the art and those who create the art, and nobody gets to own what is created in the realm of the humanities. And that to me has always just been utter trash. I don't know. I've always thought if the audience doesn't know what the author intends to say, then it is almost definitely the fault of the author, or the fault of the instructor who is putting this material before the student without enough context to understand what the author is intending to put forward. There are certainly some things, like I want to be careful with how I say that, but because there are certainly things that are wisdom that appear folly to the world.
Right.
If you don't have a proper structure for it, then you certainly won't be able to appreciate it. But at the same time, there are some things that are virtually unintelligible and incomprehensible for by any meaningful understanding of that word, and yet it's, to me, they're held up as these great works of art. And I don't know, maybe it's because it invites the audience into co-creation or something, but
No, I think it's
I,
propaganda. I actually,
yeah,
that's all.
I do too.
But, it's like, well, it's a bestseller. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
a, I've been a publisher for like 5, 6 years. It's just, it literally, we have this idea of the free market, and just like
Mm,
we have this idea that voting matters, and
yeah.
yet if you look into history and you look into the way the world ends up working, or if you just think for 5 seconds, like, well, it took me a long time to read one book, and I read more than most people.
Yeah.
I don't think every year millions of people are reading that garbage,
Right. Right.
Where, and so it's just like this promotes something that, generally speaking, just either distracts the young with
Mm,
vice, or leads the old to thinking that they don't have that they can be independent, and because
mm,
they don't have to suffer anymore. They should just let the young die,
mm,
basically. you know,
yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing I've been talking about. I've got. I think I have to do this in 7 minutes. So
Yeah. We're getting close to the end.
yeah, that's how it goes, man. But I was going to ask you something related to literature, but I feel like I'll lose the 7 minutes if I do that. One thing I've been talking about. This is barely related to books, but um, I've been talking about usury a lot lately, and
Mm,
I was just talking about the young. And one thing I found out was, um, apparently the way a bank loan works right now is it's completely different from the way it worked in the 90s. And I found this out with my own mortgage, that you can't pay the principal. It used to be you could call them and pay the principal before you paid the interest. Does
mm,
that make sense?
okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and now you can't, and the interest compounds too much, so that a 5% loan paid off in 15 years has 46% interest. At 46.
Yeah, I know there are penalties, right, for paying off a loan early because it
That's a,
basically means that they're not getting all the interest that they wanted to get out of it, which
right.
seems like it should be illegal.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Um, but and then a lot of people talk about Social Security that's insolvent. In fact, a friend of mine with 9 children was at a restaurant, and some older folk were looking at us because the children were making too much noise. And he shouted out in the middle of this restaurant, he's like, "I don't care if they're complaining. Social Security is insolvent. What are they going to do about this problem? This is what I'm doing about it." You know, I thought that was great. So anyway, so I guess if since I'm just doing whatever I feel like. Do you want to take 5 minutes to
Oh, I
complain about
lost
it?
you. Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you if you wanted to take 5 minutes to give me your thoughts on that problem as it relates to literature.
Uh, usury
Not,
in literature.
no, no, just the our generation, because we have children the same age. In fact, I watched
Yeah.
the way you raised your daughter, and I applied it to the way I raised my daughter.
Hmm.
So I know we're similar in that way. We're the same generation, and we have children that are going to live after us, God willing. Um,
Yeah.
and it just seems to me like nobody cares.
Hmm.
What do you think? That financially, that they are bleeding us dry, and also our time, and also our souls, even. There, no country,
Hmm.
no nation, no community, no money,
Hmm.
no resources, no ability to like grow your own carrot because you don't know what carrots are and you don't know
Right.
what dirt is. What do you
Yeah.
think about all that?
Um, my general attitude toward it is um, is that they if they want my soul, they can come and take it. Come and take it over my dead body, um, and
Nice.
that will just not happen. Um, if they want my health and my money, I don't have much of either, so
Right.
they're welcome to try. But ultimately, what I am responsible for and what I can manage is my soul and the souls of my family members, and those in my immediate reach.
Don't you
Which,
ever get don't you ever get worried about like just like your children, the things that are always coming in? Like
oh, for sure,
you're on your computer, a billboard, books. You
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Do you do
yeah.
public school or you guys do homeschool?
No, we definitely want to do homeschool. We're gonna give it our best shot. I think
Yeah, you haven't
honestly,
done it yet.
there
Yeah, we haven't done it yet.
yeah, I was homeschooled kindergarten and first grade. That was a long time ago. And then I think my parents adopted my sister, and with all of what was going on with that, um, my dad worked, and my mom stayed home, except for like every other weekend she would go and work a job. And I think at some point they just kind of ran out of time and attention and the energy that was required to do it. But now it seems like, especially actually, one of the blessings of COVID, apart from me being able to work from home full time. I mean, I haven't worked a day in the office really. That's not entirely true, but since they sent us home for COVID, I've been working remote, and I've spent almost every day working from home around my children. My wife stays home as well,
All
and
right.
I can't imagine, what we're going through now with our daughter.
Yeah.
I can't imagine going through that in any other capacity. But just another blessing of COVID is that more people had to figure out how to do schooling from home and started doing it, and so there are more resources for homeschooling than there ever have been. And I
Well, that's
think
good.
especially,
Uh, this time I lost you. Well, hopefully you'll come back. Maybe it's because I hit the hour mark. It's like right at the island. Well, I want you to know, sir, that God does this a lot to me with the technical difficulties. Um, I think that one of the reasons I write books is just to entertain fathers like you. Oh, there he goes. Oh, I'll miss him. Just to entertain fathers like you without corrupting their souls. So, if you ever have any fiction or anything you'd like me to write, in fact, there's a guy who asked me to write a children's book about black sheep that I have not forgotten about. I have not started because children's books are really hard for me. Then you let me know and I will try to do it. But God bless you all. That was fun, and that's all I have to say. So hopefully, there's some more